Yeah.
And what is the right terminology for these income restricted, moderate, and what's the right, correct terminology to use?
I'm not positive on that one.
Is it affordable housing, but then?
Well, but
Moderate income housing is what we typically call it.
is there one plateau or more than one bracket of income?
We usually leave that up to our housing authority to make that determination. I'm not an expert in that, so.
And this also talks about workforce housing, which is different than their rent, reduced housing based on income.
Yeah,
They're two different things.
they are.
And will we talk about the fact that he told us that for their rent reduced income, and he didn't say it here, but he said it at the meeting in Huntsville, and he gave the pricing for their units. Almost $2,000 and around $1,500 based on size. That's the exact same amount of money they would charge for those units in those income brackets if they were in Ogden, and they do have a project in Ogden, so they know what they are. But is that different than what is stated in here as workforce housing?
I'd have to ask Andy Beatles and how they handle that with their housing authority. Yeah.
Because,
Answer.
and I think it's important to understand because if the rent price point, especially in those restricted brackets, is the same as Ogden, you're gonna have a waiting list a mile long for those 29 or 30 units.
Yeah.
And that then does not become workforce housing for people in the valley, unless workforce housing means something different when it talks about workforce. It uses the exact wording of workforce housing. I'd like to know that in the context of this zoning change.
I can answer part of that question in the County Land Use and Development Management Act, where it talks about the general plan. It uses the phrase moderate income housing.
Okay.
That is the statutory phrase that is used.
Okay,
And part of the definition, or what has to be considered there, is to meet the needs of people of various income levels living, working, or desiring to live or work in that community. So they may be synonymous, but moderate income housing is the one used in the statute.
okay, but is that different than workforce housing that's used in this document?
I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, I don't have an answer to that either.
This report talks about workforce to supply housing for those that work in the area. They're gonna find area.
Right. That's
So
exactly
that
what I
means
was.
within this footprint of this application.
I think on that one, I have to do some more research on that.
But are we having to answer that for rezone as far as how they're doing?
Typically, we address that at subdivision, but
I mean, in my mind, it's part of this equation. If they're saying we're bringing this rental business model here and we're gonna have housing, where it's going to offer housing in this dense format in this particular location, which in some ways fits the general plan and others maybe not. And the reason you should like it is because it gives people who work in the valley an opportunity at a lower price point. You can say that, but that's not true. If the area means whoever wants to rent a property who meets the income, then it's the area is however far you want to drive. And that, in my observation, will mean that once those open up, the waiting list will be forever. And if somebody, opens a business in the valley and they want to hire somebody in that income bracket, they can't offer them an opportunity to live there because the waiting list would be super long. If the same pricing, if they're charging the same pricing, certainly as Ogden, it's going to be huge.
I just think that careful not to punish this applicant to what the code reads.
Yeah.
well, that's why on typically on this, we refer to the housing authority and let them deal with this.
What Cortland said is work or live. Those were your words. Yeah, so Commissioner Barber, we're interested in having people that work in the valley, live in the valley, keep that retention. But we're inviting people that don't live in the valley to get to come live in the valley and then transport themselves somewhere else to work, which is little intensive.
And we could find out how Andy would, the housing authority would do that if they could restrict it so that it does just, you know.
From what the applicant said, because that question was asked of him here. He said, no, they can't. He said they can initially,
Based on federal funding.
based on the funding and the tax code and all that,
Yeah.
stuff, they work
Maybe
every
hard.
day.
To accomplish that. then.
He said they can't restrict it going forward. That's what he said. And is he gonna be here today,
Who's that?
the applicant?
Yeah, you should be.
Speaking of that, 5 minutes past.
I have a question on this one. It says it's on the intersection. It says improvements that the county and UDOT have planned for the intersection. What do they have planned for the intersection? I heard at one point it was too expensive for the stop to put in a roundabout. This implies there was a plan.
There's no plan yet. They've talked about that, we talked about, the straight intersection. So whatever that plan is.
How did that, what's their proportional share?
Well, that's what we have to determine because we have, Eden Crossing, and then we have this one, and through all the players on our next.
Sorry, guys. You guys both have. Right here.
Here's right. Make sure I'm in the right seat.
Marta, are we ready to? Good? Rick, you good? Okay. All righty. We're gonna go ahead and call the meeting to order. Apologies, we're just a few minutes behind with our work session. We're gonna go ahead and start with the Pledge of Allegiance. If everyone can rise and remove your cap.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty.
You, let the record show that, Commissioners, Wampler and Schumann are absent, and the rest are present. And are excused. We do have minutes. I have not heard anything against the minutes. Go ahead and consider. I guess the minutes are approved. Do we need a vote on that? We don't need anything, right? Just all in favor? Does that mean? Okay, minutes, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any conflicts of interest or ex parte communications that need to be discussed tonight? Okay.
That with regard to the second administrative item, CUP 2024-03, I own a building within across the street from it. But I don't consider that impacting my ability to correctly apply the law.
For sure. Okay. We are going to move into the administrative items. We will start off with 2.1 CUP 2023-15 request for approval of a conditional use permit to bring an existing campground into compliance with conditional use standards. Director Grover, do you want to walk us through what we're doing here?
Be glad to. So this administrative item, as you look at this, you will be the final decision on this. Typically on administrative items, public comment is not taken. This is something, if it meets the code requirements, you review those and base your approval upon that. With that being said, I'm just going to kind of go through and explain the decision and what you're looking at. The campground's been in existence since the 60s, and recently we have to give some kudos to the campground. They've cleaned things up a lot, and it's just been a great change up in that area to what it was a few years ago. But what they'd like to do is they have some sheds and some fences that are around the campsites that they'd like to get approval for that were not part of the original conditional use permit. And they would like to have that included as part of the conditional use. When I looked at that, I felt that it was a little bit more than a de minimis change to the conditional use. And so I said, you need to take that to the planning commission and get their approval for it instead of doing it at the administrative level. So that's what they're doing here. They are asking for some sheds that exist out on site and some temporary fencing to be in place. As a campground, they end up bringing their trailers in the springtime, and then those trailers need to be removed by the end of October. And they've been really good about doing that. And so that's the request that's before you as you look at this. The findings and the conditions are outlined in the staff report. And if you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer them.
Is the applicant present tonight?
Yes.
Any questions from the commissioners? Or we have the app? Okay. Would the applicant like to say anything? You could feel free to come up if it's fine if not. Okay. Yeah, anything? Okay. Okay. Any questions for the applicant, Commissioner? Thank you, Marta. Okay, discussion on the matter?
So just to clarify, there is a conditional use permit in existence now.
There is, and it's very old, but it does exist. And the amount of trailers that were there previously versus what they're proposing are very similar. They are requesting about 4 or 5 more campsites, and we didn't see an issue with that.
So this is technically an amendment of the prior, or it replaces the prior?
It would replace the prior. Yeah. Yep.
Okay. Any other questions? Consider a motion.
Comment. I just think in regards to sheds, as opposed to the standard tin shed that doesn't last very long, I would probably prefer longevity with the plastic injected molded. I think it would last longer. I don't know if that, or else the tough shed type, that's a cost issue. Sure how you're gonna sure the pricing on those, but to be my input, stay away from the tin shed. Okay, thank you.
So just for the record, the applicant said that they do have them remove them, that they're, just to get you on record, I just want to make sure you were, that way she does remove them.
If the conditional use permit requires them to maintain whatever they put there, then they're in violation if they don't, whether it be plastic or metal.
Right.
So think it ought to be left to them what they want to do.
Being the key.
I'll, your motion,
I'll make a motion.
Okay.
I move that we approve the conditional use permit application file number CUP 2023-15 for a campground approximately 10-455 East Highway 39, Huntsville, Utah. Based upon the recommendations and findings set forth in the staff report.
got a first,
Second.
a second? Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, thank you. Okay, we'll move on to the next administrative item, CUP 2024-03, request for a conditional use permit to operate as a package agency for the Department of Alcoholic Beverage Services. Rick, do you want to?
You bet.
Director Grover?
So on this one, Marta, if you would pull up the location, the area in red here is the location that they're looking at. It's located in the CB2 zone. And right now there was a liquor store or liquor license that was up at Wolf Creek, and that's no longer there. And so this would be requesting a liquor license for the only one in the Ogden Valley. A few things as you look at the conditional use is you want to look at the impact that it may have on potential residents and things like that. We've looked at the parking and trash and those type of things, and we don't see an issue that way. They meet the parking requirements. One concern that we do have, and Marta, if you wouldn't mind popping to the next slide. It's where it says simply Eden is the location of this building. And when we look at working with liquor, we have to look at distance requirements, and we do this more out of courtesy because the state has a requirement for that. And we have been in contact with the state. And if you go to the next slide, Marta, actually that's a building right there that would be located in. This is just a letter from Jeff Colvin with the state, just indicating that as far as the proximity and the walking distance, they meet the requirements. And so that's what you're looking at. Any questions?
Is the applicant present? Perfect, thanks. Any questions for Director Grover, staff, commissioners? Okay, would the applicant like to come up and say anything, or? Okay, no presentation, okay, that would be fine. Staff or commissioners, do you have any questions for the applicant you'd like him to come up for? And if they do ask you to come, just come up to the mic and state your name.
So I'm sorry, I haven't been in Simply Eden business. Is that going to continue to operate, whatever it does, or is this a switch out to a new use?
Yeah, we have that under contract to buy that building from the owner that's currently operating Simply Eating, based on whether or not we get approval with our licensing. So we're the current owners of Valley Market, if that, just to clarify that. So we do have experience in retail operating, currently have a Class A beer license and things of that nature. So we've been up there in the Valley. We're in our 20th year of business. So we feel confident that we can abide by the laws and the standards that the state requires, as well as the counties.
Can I get your name just for the record?
Oh, my name's Tom Ferguson.
Thanks.
And my partner's Terry Hancock.
Perfect, thank you.
Sure.
I guess I don't have a great understanding of liquor stores, but I assume that people will come to buy liquor from throughout the valley. To
Correct.
this one location, because this is the one location that can be sold.
Right.
And I don't know, but I wonder if the kids at Snowcrest frequent this little commercial area. I know they walk over to the Maverick to get lunch and
Mhm.
treats.
Well, there's a bar a couple doors down.
Yeah.
That's also there. So whether or not they frequent that area, I can't answer that, but I know they're in our store quite a bit down there at the market. But they certainly wouldn't be allowed to peruse the inside the liquor store.
And the signage that you will have, will that be similar to what Simply Eden?
Yeah.
Just a small sign on the building?
Yeah. There'll be very little changes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you bet. Any other questions?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any questions for staff or yeah, I guess, yeah, or between us, discussion between us? Okay, then I can entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion that we approve ZM A 2024-05. The reason and that is based on the recommendations and findings set forth in this document.
What was that file number one more time? Commissioner Barber?
Sorry, I misstated it. It is CUP 2024-03.
Oh. Please,
It is the conditional use permit to operate a package
oh,
agency.
wait, there is a typo here. Director Grover, if you read
Yes.
the first one, there's 2024-03, you actually go to the application, it's 2023-06.
I noticed that.
So just so Commissioner Barber, through your motion, I think that just note that for friendly amendment. Okay. Got a first? Do I have a second?
I second the motion.
Any discussion?
I assume Commissioner Barber, this document means the staff report.
Yeah, the document in front of the staff, based on the recommendations and findings set forth in this staff report document. It is part of today's agenda. Yes.
Good. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Motion carries unanimous. Okay, thank you. We will move on to the legislative part of our agenda. Application 3.1 ZMA 2024-05. I'm just gonna confirm that we got those numbers right. Yep. Director Grover, this is a public hearing on a request to rezone approximately 17 acres of land located at approximately 2773 North Highway 158 from the AB3 zone to the form-based zone. Want to go ahead and explain what we're doing?
Yeah, you'll have a public hearing on this and you'll be forwarding on a recommendation to the county commission. The public hearing, you'll need to open and close the public hearing with a motion. And I'm going to present and the applicant's here and you can ask him any questions as well as we go through this.
Perfect.
So this is a rezone and a potential development agreement that's being requested to form-based in this area. Marty, can you go to the next slide? This is the current zoning map amendment review. And so this is kind of the radius that you're looking at when looking at the general plan. Marta, next, please. And this shows the subject property in gray, just to the top right of the circle, and how this relates to the current form-based area to the east of here, and then also to the valley area here. And so you can kind of get a feel that way. Marta, next, please. And this is a subject property here again, showing the CB2 a little bit more in detail. And I don't have my cursor here, but in the top left portion of the subject property, there's a small segment that's CB2, but the rest of it is zoned AB3. And so you'll be looking at the request of having this form base, which would tie into the form base to the east of here. Next, please. And then this map just shows the aerial and just kind of how things are all laid out there. And then we're going to get into a little bit more detail as we start looking at the form base, the street regulating plan. Marta, if you would go to the next, please. When we look at form base, there's a few things that we look at and the purpose and the intent of the form based when we look at this. And this is a separation of land uses, and it looks more at the architecture style and the form of the buildings. And then the uses, it allows a lot more uses in this area because you're looking at how the form and the building relates to the area. And so we're trying to look at that continuity and how you have form relating to the actual build environment. Next, please. And as part of this, we look at the street regulating plan, and this is the big component of the rezone. And does it comply with the street regulating plan or does it not? And so in this situation, you can see the area in gray that's being identified. And when you look at the lower section of the area, that's more mixed use, commercial. And then as you move further up, you go into multifamily, and then you go into small area lots in through there. And so the developer, he looked at those things and he's proposing, if you go to the next slide, Marta, please. This is his proposal here, and you down on the bottom left is where you see the commercial, and then in between that, it shows the green area, and this is open space, and that's identified on the street regulating plan as well. And then the rest of this would be small lot residential in through here. When you look at the area surrounding this in through here, you do have two homes that's kind of in the middle of the small lot residential area. And then, like I mentioned, to the east of here is the form-based area, and then to the west is the CB2 zone. So as staff looked at this, we feel that it is following the street regulating plan and the intent of what was proposed there. And so as such, we looked at, well, what would be the appropriate conditions for this? Because typically we try not to have conditions associated with this because you're looking at form-based and we have those regulations already laid in place. But as we looked at this, we felt that there was probably a few more conditions that should be in place to help make this compatible with the area. And so if you go to the next slide, Marta, these are some of the recommendations. And the first recommendation that we have in here is that when we look at the vehicular oriented commercial and the small lot residential areas, that the park area, that there should be certain things included in that. And so we've included some things in that. We'd also like the possibility of the park district to look at if they would like to pick this up. And we don't know that right now. And so we wanted to have the ability for them to weigh in on that if they would like when they get to the subdivision level of it. So we have some of that information in there as well. Items 2 and 3, we start looking at trailheads and trails and things like that. And so those are some things we've included in the development agreement. And we also wanted to make sure too that there's no septic systems that are occurring in this area. And so they would need to work that out as part of the subdivision level when they get to that. And then also with the main highway, Highway 158 going through here, we wanted to make sure that they worked with UDOT and that they get the right type of approval from them. But we also wanted to make sure that the design that we have in there, that they're also complying with the design that we have in the form-based code. And then the last one is at the intersection, the four-way stop, whatever plans are approved in that area, that they pay, their proportionate fee in there. And so based upon this, staff's recommending approval of this with those conditions being added to the development agreement. Any questions?
No questions? Okay. And the applicant is here.
Yes.
Feel free to come on up and state your name for the record. And
Hello, my name is Chris Zarek. I'm with Cowboy Partners. Thank you for having me here this evening. I thought I'd talk just a little bit. Some of this is going to be a little familiar to you from the working session, some to the members of the audience here from the meeting we had at Huntsville Library about a week ago. You know, there was some great feedback from that meeting that hasn't necessarily been put into the presentation that we have tonight, that I think is legitimate conversation and refinement that we can make to the site plan as we get deeper into site design. And we can talk a little bit about that, but I wanted to talk a little about our intention for the property and for the village center that we'd like to put here at this site. Cowboy Partners, again, is a Utah-based, mostly multifamily developer, although we do a lot of mixed-use projects. We do all manner of residential development at all scales, from single family to towers, from extremely low income to luxury market rate development. Our last two developments we completed actually were what is currently the highest per square foot rented tower in Salt Lake City. And just before that was a permanent supportive housing project for the chronically homeless. So that's a pretty good bookend to the type of work that we do. We are long-term holders. We are also operators. So everything that we develop, we operate. We only operate what we develop. And so we are building here with the intention of being here and being neighbors for a long time. And when we develop, when we build it with an operator's eye. So we're building things that we know are going to be resilient and run well for the long term. So I think everyone is familiar with the site. Thank you for the presentation from Mr. Clever. And of course, it's, I guess, suitability for the form-based zone. Of course, this site sits in the area that was initially intended for the Newtown Eden Village Center. And we have endeavored to, and certainly want to commit to the uses that have been put into that form-based zone for this particular area. Those work well with what we are thinking in terms of development that might happen here. So one of the things to understand, and this, dominated some of the discussion that we had at the work session, a lot of the discussion that we had at the public meeting. Of course, the street regulating plan is a very unique method of zoning. in that it both sets a street grid and sets use, right? So within the site plan that you see on the screen here, we have what is largely a small lot residential village center project with some aspect of green space and some aspect of commercial as well, close to the intersection. Within that, you can see the areas that are intended to become public way, essentially. So, you know, you've seen diagrams both at the public meeting and at the work session with the street sections included. But, you know, as we see it here, you can see that grid kind of overlaid and what will become public way. In total, on this particular area, we have about 4.5 acres of the 17 that will become public in some way, right? Whether it's part of the street, part of sidewalks, landscape, park strips, green space, park, right? So a little over 25% of our current site is intended to go over to public use after we've made all of the various improvements from roadways and sidewalks and green space and playgrounds and stormwater and everything that goes into creating the infrastructure that will make this a village center. So of that 4.5 acres, a little over 2 will be sidewalks, green space, and, you know, program related to that open space. So I think it's important to get that out there. You know, we certainly recognize that part of any village center, part of a community, is that open space and communal space. So I'd like to talk a little bit about our vision as we see it for this particular area. And it starts with that commercial village close to Valley Market, close to what will become the roundabout, where we think it's very appropriate, of course, to kind of help to both benefit from and add to the commercial gravity that we have at that intersection. It's not a large area. We understand that, you know, our vision for this particular area is for something that can become an amenity really for both our residents and the community at large, right? So we want to take the opportunity to find users that we think fit well within the community, that serve a particular need, that fit well together. And we're not spec retail developers. We like to find what we think will be a great user, what we think will get residents excited and bring them in and build to them, right? So in our mind, that might be a destination restaurant, right? A breakfast place, a gastropub, something that, you know, is a neighborhood amenity. You know, these are the things that residents and community members really prize, and find retail that can fold into that and fold into something that is useful for the community. Whether that's tying into recreational aspects or tying into a need that's underserved in the community. So we like to put our emphasis on finding great users, great operators, people that we have a lot of faith in, and then build what they need. So transitioning from the commercial village to the residential village will be a green space. You know, right now in the street regulating plan and on our plan, there is a section of road that comes right through this green space, and it's important to talk about that. That's part of the form-based zone ordinance as we understand it. We've depicted it here as running through the middle with green space on either side, because that's how we understand it within the ordinance. Now, our preference, and certainly what we heard you know, at our public meeting, was that some better, you know, agglomerating that green space together is better. And we think that as well, you know, to the point that we can put that roadway to one side or another, or of course, right now it's a roadway to nowhere, right? It's connecting to a property and a project that might be years or decades or never from now, right? So our hope would be to find, you know, what is the right way to approach that part of the public way in the meantime, and then what makes for the best open space, you know, before and after that road comes. And so, you know, part of this will be certainly trying to move that together and in discussing with some of the neighbors. Certainly, that green space can serve to be a buffer between the commercial space and the residential, but it can also perhaps be used to be a buffer between the houses that are there and the project that is coming. And so we're certainly willing to have that conversation as well. And it's always been our intention that the edge with the existing homeowners needs to have a heavy amount of landscape and greenscape and screening anyway. So the residential area is going to have different character as you move around the site, or at least that is our intent. And you know, the way that we might balance between the, you know, denser 2 and 3 level flats and row house type development and the single family for rent development somewhat depends on how we're putting together the utilities, you know, water, sewer, and TDRs. And that's going to really be informed by that. So we'll have to be able to react to that as we're putting together the site here. And so I want to recognize that. But our intent for the southern portion of the east side of the highway is for a workforce housing project. That'll be the densest part of the residential development, likely 2 to 3 stories, some, you know, 2-story row house attached townhome type of development with tuck under parking from the rear with doors on the street, right? We want to create what feels like a village street and have housing on the street with some flats at different, you know, 3-story areas. We've done a number of projects in suburban and, you know, village and rural settings and context where we wrap surface parking and rear loaded parking with row homes and flats to create a very nice village scaled street with parking that can serve the residential without becoming you know, a problem for the neighborhood, right? So we've done that in several instances in the past. It's a forum that is very appealing for residents and for the community. And so and it creates kind of density that can help respond to the affordable housing that we'd like to build here. Our intention is for their, you know, looking at the size of the acreage that we have here and what we might expect to yield. You know, our intent is that there would be about 80 to 100 homes here between 2-story townhouses and studio 1 and 2-bedroom flats. This would be intended to be affordable workforce housing for, you know, people working in the area. It's something that we know well, that we is very resilient and is indistinguishable from a market rate project in the way that we do it. Those would serve people making between mostly 50 and 80% of the area median income. And, you know, within that bracket are many of the jobs that you're going to see in the commercial areas in Eden, certainly at the resorts around, and people working around the valley floor. So that in our experience in projects all over in Salt Lake City, in Summit County, in Wasatch County, in Weber County, you can throw a baseball from the front door here and hit one of our projects, Liberty Junction. These projects have multi-year waiting lists, right? So, you know, we have one that has a 6-year waiting list currently. So we know that this housing is useful and in demand. So you can see a little bit of kind of the scale and how we'd like to relate to the street. Of course, part of the unique aspect of this project is the, you know, the design criteria that are within the form-based zone. Certainly we want to respond to that. We think that it's great. You know, it matches perfectly with how we might like to approach the site here. So running in the center of the site, of course, we need a residential center as well. We will have a leasing office. Of course, we have management on site, maintenance, and amenities collectively for the residents of the project. This will be a for rent project, both the single family for rent and the workforce housing, of course. And, we will aggregate and, create a large open space, pool, clubhouse, gym, have all of those amenities to serve the residential community, and have our property management here and part of the community, and of course, part of this residential community as well. So part of what you'll see as we move on to the single family for rent and the small lot residential, our take on the single family residential is to be, to run along, what is intended with the small lot residential, right? It's a minimum of 3,000 square feet and up to 4 units per lot. So for the single family for rent, of course, we want 1 home per lot. But the yards are not necessarily what you might see as you drive around Wolf Creek, right? These aren't acre lots. They're intended to be smaller lot residential, but all of them will have, a very kind of safe and beautiful connection to this collected open space and to amenities that, become shared. And certainly we want all of the residents to have access to both the amenities we have here, and of course the public space that we're creating on the other side of the highway. Something to talk about as well is a little bit of the street section, right? So 60-foot right-of-ways are quite wide. That's not necessarily what we might choose, but that's what's included in the zoning, and that's what transportation is asking for. But within that, that's not just asphalt, right? Within that, we have a couple of travel lanes. We want these travel lanes to be somewhat narrow and for people to slow down where it's appropriate, to have street parking so people can visit. Even our single family for rent will have garages that are rear loaded. But that parking then serves as a bit of a buffer from a landscape strip and sidewalk before you get to these homes that are on the street, right? So really, we'll have a lot of focus into how we design the roadways of the community to kind of keep that village feel. So that leaves the balance of the site, which is intended for small lot residential. So the east side of the site will likely be what we're intending to be smaller homes, and you can kind of see those, kind of a general idea illustrated here, right? So you might, at the bottom of the screen with this general footprint might be what is the public roadway, right? And the front door and the house on the street, then the garage at the rear loaded off of an alley, right? So these are 2-story homes, right? 2-3 bedrooms, most likely. Smaller, 1,300 to 1,800 square feet, perhaps. As you move to the west side of the street, I think what we recognize is we have a very unique shape. We have public way that's going to be coming through that space. And then, of course, we have a couple of existing homes that we need to deal with as well. So, my initial thought on that particular area is that it's probably better suited for larger homes, larger lots, less intensity, and which I think will fit well within the depth and the space that we have there, and work a little bit better with the existing homeowners that are already there. So with that is broadly how we are looking to apply the form-based zone on this particular site, and certainly happy to take whatever questions you might have.
Yeah, I have a few. You can bear with me here for a minute. So how would you differentiate, if at all, between moderate income housing, affordable housing, and workforce housing? I heard all 3 of those used today, this evening. Could you define each one, or if they're the same, say so?
Sure. Well, in some ways, they're a little bit the same, right? Workforce housing is generally understood to be a little more targeted to 60 to 100% AMI, right? And it really all falls under affordable housing. In some instances, you can get a project done that serves 80 to 100% AMI without subsidy. That's pretty rare and is typically in very high income areas. But really anything that's bringing in subsidies to help bring those restricted rents really considered affordable housing. Workforce housing is usually used to denote that higher AMI, and sometimes used when you can at times have restrictions related to people who work within a geographical area. And that kind of depends on the type of subsidy that you're bringing in to help with those projects. And so those very specifically are workforce housing because you've created a preference for people who work within a particular area.
So from a numeric standpoint, how many units in total, market rate units in total, and how many subsidized units in one form or another are you envisioning on this total rezone?
In total, I think on the workforce housing side, I would expect 80 to 100.
80 to 100.
Correct. And on the market rate side, the single family for rent, 50 to 70.
So the majority of this entire project you'll receive subsidies from somewhere.
Correct.
To do this, okay? And you mentioned with workforce housing, you have some ability to define the area where these individuals can work. Could you go into that in some depth? Because that's something that I've heard stated a couple different ways.
Sure. So within a marketing plan, every residential project has to abide by Fair Housing Act rules, right? So when you are creating a marketing plan and when you are creating a marketing plan with a preference, you're required to submit it to HUD, right? And so part of what you're doing there is showing to HUD how you're going to market that project in a way that doesn't discriminate against protected classes. And so what that means is when we have a project that has a preference for people that work, say in Ogden Valley, right? We would say that we have a preference for people that might work in the Newtown Eden area. And then number two is in, some larger diameter from the intersection of 162 and 158. And then maybe Ogden Valley as a whole, the Ogden Valley planning area. Within that, we have to include, well, how are you going to serve retired persons within that, right? Seniors. How are you going to address disabled persons who can't work because they're disabled? Those are protected classes, right? So the marketing plans then say, well, if there's a disabled person who applies to be on the waiting list, they get treated as if they were the first preference, as if they work within Newtown Eden. And so going through that process, working with HUD and the Fair Housing Enforcement Office, they approve that marketing plan. And then that's how you create that workforce preference. You cannot, under any circumstances necessarily, if you're using any kind of federal subsidy, give a preference to a single employer, right? It needs to be within a geographical area because the general public can work within a geographical area. Generally.
So you can then, with these 80 to 100 units, say that everybody who resides there has to work in the valley or have one of these other protected class scenarios in their favor.
Yeah, I can't say they have to work. I can move people who do work within that area to the top of the waiting list. So at some point it needs to open up to the general public if it's not renting to one of those other preferences.
So, for example, you said you have that at your Ogden project, a 6-year waiting list on the subsidy type housing.
I don't know if that's the Ogden one that one was,
Okay,
but yeah, sure.
So assuming in the valley, you'll have a waiting list as well.
Mhm.
And a person comes in and they work legitimately in the valley, they meet the economic requirements, they would go to the top of the list.
Yes,
Or would you have two lists, one for those kind of folks and one for everyone else? How would that work?
Generally, however many preferences you have, or, and we have projects that have 6, right, that go down. So it's one list, but it's functions as 6 separate lists, right? So if that person works in the top preference, they would go to the top of the list behind all of the other people who also meet that preference, who may have applied earlier than them, right? And so when a home opens up, then you start to go, you start at the top of the list. Are you in a place where you can move in? Yes or no? And you kind of move down as you go. And our managers regularly kind of go through that list anyway, just to understand, hey, are you still looking for housing? And that it gets cold as people have moved on or moved away or don't qualify any longer.
And at the meeting last Tuesday, you mentioned some price points for the subsidized housing. You mentioned 2 different ones, and you said those were the same as if that size unit would exist in Ogden.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so that's a forever situation because of the proximity.
Right. HUD is the one that sets the rent restrictions, and they're the ones that set the area median incomes, and those are done generally by county.
So for the market rate units, would the pricing be different than Ogden?
Perhaps. I mean, it could be. Likely we would go in to those market rate units looking to projects, comparable projects, to the point that there are any. There's not a whole lot of single family for rent projects in Ogden, but we'd be looking at projects in Ogden as kind of a starting point for what that market rate might be. But it could very well, everything at some point becomes really specific, right? So.
All right, different question here. You mentioned the road situation and specifically the one that goes to the park. If you were offered just a blank zoning change for you to bring the same project in, could you deliver a better project to the community if you were not held to the street regulating plan that exists there now? Or if it was modified to your own desire, could you deliver a better, more functional, better project going forward?
Well, I mean, it's a loaded question, right? And it has 2 answers. I mean, from my standpoint, probably yes, right? I mean, it frees up the designer to kind of work in all of the various things. We're still looking for public open space. We're still looking, we want to bring the public in. We have this commercial area. It's a site that has some strange dimensions to it, right? So it's not like there's a million ways to cut it. But at the same time, my job is to look at this 17 acres, right? The form-based zone and the planning department's job is to look at the entire district, right? And so, what I do understand is that in the long run, 50 years from now, it's probably better that we've thought about connectivity between these different projects, right? So that we don't have a bunch of walled gardens in this place where we want to have a village center. So, I recognize the difficulty in doing that, right? I think most specifically, if I had a blank slate, I would say I don't know that we need 3 60-foot wide roads connecting over to the west within a pretty constrained area, right? I'd get rid of one of those immediately, but beyond that, it's not like it's terrible.
The last question for right now, maybe the most important one, when you talked to us before about the transfer of development rights, you maybe had the initial concept you could buy excess from the ski resorts or something, and that was pointed out that that's not. The transfer of development rights is really the cornerstone of the general plan, or a big part of it. So in this last month, have you thought any more about it or looked into it or have any specificity on how you're going to actually come up with development rights when today a market doesn't really exist?
Right. Well, I mean, I've had some thoughts on certainly. I think it would behoove everyone if there were some way to create that market, right? And to be honest, I think the thing to do to really kind of create that marketplace is probably to bring in a land trust or a nonprofit that works in, open space conservation, right? To be a place where landowners who are willing and who, want to sell their development rights and keep their land for open space or for agriculture, be a place where, they can say, hey, I'm interested here and keep my information, or perhaps be a place where they can donate those development rights and get some sort of tax benefit for that might be in aggregate a lot more than what those development rights might go for on the open market, and then allow that nonprofit to go forward and sell that to developers as a means to raise funds for their own activities. As one of the things that really needs to happen here is for kind of the retail development right, the person that has, 3 or 4, right, because they own 12 acres somewhere and wants to sell 2 or 3. That's a hard thing for me to just call up every landowner in the valley and try and assemble 150 of these, right? People don't want to be bugged by me necessarily. So it'd be better if there were some sort of place where, the interested parties were already there or they already existed. Beyond that, from my standpoint, and if I had specificity, I don't know that I would give it in a public meeting in terms of where we're going, but if certainly from a commercial standpoint, finding a single person that you can have those negotiations with is a much more straightforward way to do that than to try and bring together 40 or 50 different parties to pull that. That's really difficult. So I think it really is key at some point to find who is going to be that market maker.
Questions?
I have a question. Could you go back to your project zoning? I believe it's the 6th. Back there. If I look at it, I look up in the north corner where you show that road, then you show a dashed line that appears to go through the adjacent property and putting that road where it gets wider right next to that house. Could you explain that?
Yeah, so I think you had, I think Mr. Glover had the original street regulating plan actually had that street coming through the very north edge of that property. We moved it to the property line, so a little more on our property. We're not intending to pave on their site, if that's what you're asking. I will say all of the street regulating plans, all of those go on people's property that aren't intending to do them right now, right? That's how it exists. It sits on, as an overlay on the ground, right? But that's
Okay, it just appears very different if I look at that, because the road narrows, then it shows a dashed line through the other people's property.
yes, yeah, because half of it sits on our side and half of it sits on theirs, right? So it's, if that property ever comes open for development and they want to build out that road, we'll build out that road with them. But I think our site plan is going to look to not necessarily utilize that road in what we're doing, because it's not something that we can construct, but nor do we want to take the whole 60-foot road necessarily from where it currently is on the street regulating plan, which is on their property. We've kind of split it, right? As in good faith. But we're not certainly we're not going to build on their property. We're not going to do anything necessarily as it relates to that road until that property decides it wants to redevelop, which is the same thing with all of the roads that connect into other people's property, right? We're not looking to extend any of those or do anything necessarily beyond our property line that would impede upon enjoyment of their property.
Thank you.
Other comments from the commissioners for the applicant?
Yes, so just a couple more. You've looked at the form-based code. is there anything in there, maybe besides a street or two, that you might want to tweak? Anything else that you would consider seeking a variance on or changing?
You know, I think, I'll say, and this is more of a small technical thing, right? Right now, our, the area where we might have the workforce housing right here. Let's see, sorry. That's going to function as a single entity, right? Those are, it'll have whatever sort of subsidies help support affordable housing. It'll have a single owner, it'll have a tax credit investor, it makes sense for that. In any other context, we would do that as one parcel, right? And that would just kind of simplify things. As it is, that's going to be 20 to 25 different parcels, because that's how the small lot residential reads, right? I mean, I suppose we could try and plug it into the highway, which is a multifamily, right? But that's just a legal headache and a title headache at some point. But that would be something I'd do quite easily. But beyond that, there is a height limit here. 3 stories is fine. We never really wanted to go above 3 stories, and generally we're at 2 stories or below.
So the height limit is 40 feet.
And
You can live with 40 feet.
yeah, and that's pretty doable. I think what you want to do is keep enough room for roof expression, right? For gables, and we need 33 feet or so for, 9-foot floor to floors, right? And then you have a parapet or whatever kind of roof structure. And then if you're doing gables or some sort of peaked roof, you need something above that, right? So we might have preferred 3 occupiable stories and 45 feet, right? Or some, signifier that allowed us to do a little bit additional height just for architectural expression. But beyond that, the form part of the form base is pretty workable for us.
So the architectural standards that are in the code work for you?
Mhm.
And what about garages? I've seen in mountain communities, especially workforce type housing, where people have trucks or SUVs with ski racks, that I've seen in ski towns where they build new buildings and the typical vehicles people drive don't fit in the garages. So they end up parked all over the place.
Yeah, it's funny. It's something that certainly we do a lot of building in mountain communities, and we have some communities where we've done 10-foot tall garage doors, right? Rather than 8. It's just expecting that there's racks and taller vehicles and lifted vehicles and so forth. And a surprising amount of those vehicles still park outside, right? There's just something about they don't want to go in, even though they've got more than enough space to do it. So it's a strange behavioral thing that you start to learn as you operate these communities. But yes, that would go into the design of the garages, and we think about those things.
Do you wire your garages for level 2 EV charging?
Yes. Whether we would, we have a number of properties where we have wired for chargers, but left that to the resident who might be moving in.
Going back to preferences under HUD, is there a priority of these preferences? Is there a super preference?
Well, I mean that it's all how you define it, right? I think the standard approach is just, not to have a preference, right? You just in reality, these projects tend to attract residents who have some sort of connection to the area, right? Who work in the area. And this one specifically, it really makes sense for people who are employed in the area to be there, right? Like just with its proximity and everything that's there. So even operating without priorities or preferences, these projects tend to be have residents who are working in the area and part of the community. But beyond that, it goes, however you define it, right? We have a project in Summit County that we're starting that is, part of an agreement between a landowner there and the county. And in that one in particular, there is a preference for people who work within, the large area where the planning area where the property sits, the other property sits. And then after that, so it's full-time workers in that area, part-time workers in that area, county employees or, public safety officers, first responders, teachers, so forth. After that, it's people who live and work in Eastern Summit County, unincorporated portions of Summit County, and then Summit County as a whole, right? And then after that, the general public, right? So, and we work through all of that in the marketing plans, and within that, of course, disabled persons, we speak to that. We speak to people who might work and then retire. But there's, it's not foolproof, right? People, part of what HUD likes to do is housing stability, right? So, it's difficult to come up with a marketing plan that says that if a resident starts working in a place, but then starts to work somewhere else, you can just kick them out. It's not quite that clean, right? Oftentimes you have to let them, either at the very least have a pretty long period to find new housing. But, generally most marketing plans let those residents stay, right? Because the priority is to keep people in a home and keep people part of a community. So that is one difficult part of priorities and preferences.
I guess one could look at our valley as an island. And we got 3 bridges coming to this island. And our planning commission has been concerned about how do we minimize traffic over these bridges? If I heard correctly, you said one could rent in the valley in this specialized housing, this subsidized housing, at the same rate he could rent in Ogden.
Yes.
Okay, so the rent's the same in the valley as in Ogden. So, yeah.
Right.
You can
For
see
for
maybe where
affordable
I'm-
housing
where I'm
projects.
thinking, our concern is how do we decrease traffic over the bridges? And we're kind of potentially increasing traffic over the bridges if we can't prioritize workforce housing for people that are actually working in the valley and don't have to go over the bridges.
Yep. Well, I mean, again, I think priorities are, there's something that can be done. And I'll say in our practical experience, we have affordable housing in Heber, right? It's a wonderful project. It's very nicely located in Heber. The residents of that community primarily work in Heber. There's no resident preference there. There's nothing like that. But in, people who are in workforce housing, in affordable housing, they're not necessarily looking to sign up for the extra expense of working or commuting and living a long distance from the place where they work. So, it is our experience that even without resident preference, these communities tend to be filled with our neighbors, right? With the people who are in this community and the people that are working in this community. But, I only illustrate it to say that there's, it is less clear within HUD rules as to if a person starts a job and retires, well, we're not going to move them out of that unit necessarily. And that's something that HUD would have a problem with. And, that's actually rules within affordable housing as well. There are rules that allow for residents who start to increase their income. Again, they can stay in place, as long as, and that's, not seen as antithetical to workforce housing. We can't necessarily charge them more rent, but that is, part of affordable housing from a HUD context is trying to meet that rent restriction, but the other part is trying to create community, long-term stability for families, right? And so we're always striking a balance between that.
Okay. Now, you can't distinguish between workforce housing and affordable housing. They're kind of the same, right?
I think of them as the same. I think there's a portion of affordable housing that's a little more deeply targeted that people might not use the workforce label on, but in general, even the people who are at 40% of AMI, like there's an income there, right? That's someone making $40,000 a year, right? So they're likely still part of the workforce in some fashion.
Okay. All right. Have you done, has Cowboy Partners done a development under the form-based zone anywhere?
So let's see. We have a couple of projects in Salt Lake City that are within, form-based and kind of transit-based zones that work in much the same way, right? Don't necessarily speak to the use, but speak to the form, the roof form, the style of the aesthetic, and the way that you might plug into, especially if it's a kind of a transit form-based zone. There are a lot of points for certain aspects that might encourage that kind of transit orientation. So it's not unfamiliar to us.
Okay. And following up on a question by Commissioner Barber, if I understood you correctly, when he asked you about, does the form base restrict you in coming up with the best development you could develop? It seems like form base kind of takes part of the creativity away from you and says, if you're going to develop in our form base, it's going to look like this.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if you developed in another zone, you would choose what it looks like.
Sure.
And where you're going to be an operator forever on this, you want it to be the best it can be.
Right.
And does that restrict your ability then? I think you said yes, to be the best you can be if you're in this form-based zone.
Well, I think as it relates to the aesthetic, right? So there are design standards within the code here, and if the design standards weren't palatable to us, we would have asked for a revision to the ordinance. We think we can work within those standards, and we think those standards are a good fit for what a person might want to do here and should do here. So we don't see that as a hindrance. We have a lot of faith that we're going to create a great looking project that can fit well within those design standards. The roadways, right? You always want to kind of building forms, or any project, especially right now with costs where they're at and interest rates where they're at, you want to be able to build the things that you can't see in buildings as efficiently as possible, right? You want structure and utilities and all of those things to be the most cost efficient thing they can be, so that you can spend more money on the things that people see and touch and feel. Within that too, of course, as operators, we want something that has a sensible move-in route and is accessible by fire and has a trash pickup that it makes sense, and all of those operational things. Those things usually are where we start in how we're laying out a site, and then the circulation comes to serve that, right? So it is a little more difficult to start with the circulation and think about how do we design a project to serve the circulation. But again, that's, I think, the challenge to creating a village center in a place where, was largely farm fields or just kind of a collection of projects that didn't have that kind of broader vision. So, we certainly can understand the need for it, but so I think that part of it would be easier for us, but we're here because we're used to doing things that aren't that easy.
On one of your slides here, you show a road just kind of ending and the two houses are across the street.
Yeah, I think that is, that's something that came up and that's something we need to change, quite honestly. I mean, that one is not, it's not required, within the street regulating plan. That's at a spot that makes sense for the depth of the residential lot and the alley that we might have behind it, right? Because that's intended to be single family residential there. So we need to think about, how we are bringing people to the highway in a way that's less disruptive for the neighbor across the street.
So all these things are subject to change.
Yeah, I mean, I think the zoning, of course, doesn't change, right? And that's what we're here to ask for. And we think, as we've looked at this particular makeup and vision has been unchanged since we came to this site, even before we understood the street regulating plan. This is in general what we wanted to do. But, there certainly we can refine certainly the actual built space and site plan and, unit count and homes and so forth. They're going to have to flex a little bit as we adjust to, where the water's coming from, where the sewer's coming from, the density rights that we bring in, and, all the realities of finance that come in as well. So, but particularly those aspects, those are things that we could change, certainly.
Okay. And one final question, on one of your slides, it's project approach. And it shows, I think if I'm looking at the colors correctly, there'll be multifamily housing on the North Wolf Creek Drive. The road going up between the west parcel and the east parcel. Is it your intent to put multifamily housing along that road?
So right here to the point that area touches Wolf Creek Drive, that's the area that's meant to have more of the attached housing, right? The row homes and some of the flats. So, that will be, we won't have single family housing in that area. That will be more attached housing, and that's a little bit denser. It'll still be 2- and 3-story housing, as is depicted here. But and so, I mean, multifamily, yes, like that would be considered multifamily in my mind. But how we'll have to, within that approach, though, we're still working with small lots, and that's where we're putting multiple units per lot, right? We're doing, either a couple units side by side, or we're doing, flats that are 2 or 3 levels tall.
Okay, so if we drove into the east side where you started with your little boomerang there, if we drove in there, the farther we drove in, we would see small lots with individual
Right.
townhomes or something.
Right. As as you'd be kind of coming in, because there is a road coming between that boomerang and the residential center, right? So within that residential green will be our leasing office and the clubhouse and kind of the community center, right?
Right.
And then they'll have the green space and pool and all those things a part of that. But as you move around, on the north side of that residential green, that would be single family homes, on the park there on that green.
Okay, and on the west side of that east parcel, we would see 2 3-story apartment building.
On the, on the east side
to Wolf Creek Drive.
Right.
That would be the west side of the east parcel.
Yes.
If you drive up toward Wolf Creek, you'd be looking out on your right-hand side.
Right. Yeah.
You'd see 2 3-story apartment houses. And the same on the west side. That would be the east side of the west parcel.
No, on the west side, we have commercial buildings closer to the intersection, and then the park, and then single family on the west side. So we're not looking at that kind of multifamily density on the west side.
Okay, but under the form-based zone, you could,
You
because
could,
that's in the
yes,
street
yeah.
regulating plan.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
I have a follow-up question. I think everybody in the room probably knows that a cost of housing, no matter what it is more expensive in the valley than Ogden. Just the cost of old home, new home, rent, whatever. It costs more to live in the valley. That's a fact. Probably always will be. And as we move towards the Olympics and things, it's probably may even get more intense in that way. So do you expect to spend more to build and landscape a project or a unit in the valley versus Ogden, given the person is going to be spending more money, most likely in the market rate units?
Yes. Yeah. And as we talk to contractors, we know that there's a premium to building here than there is to building in Ogden. It's the same thing in Park City as it relates to Salt Lake City. We're used to that. And yeah, the single family for rent is probably not something we would do in Ogden, right? That you wouldn't find the right site, you wouldn't find the size, the land cost wouldn't be right. So I think it in some ways, the obvious constraints to building here kind of lead you to have to build building a 2-story home is less expensive in per square foot than building a 7-story building, right? And all the structure that goes into it, but we'll certainly be spending more to build it here, to build it to the design standards than we would be building a 2-story single family home in Ogden.
So, Rick, I have a question, maybe at some point before the public hearing for you, that if you could tell me when that's appropriate to ask you that question. So I learned that, the numbers here, 80 to 100 income modifier, income restricted workforce housing type units, and 50 market rate units. So how can we know, as we contemplate this zoning change, what the number of development rights will be complete that project?
So as far as lot area goes, what you're looking at for small lot residential, is 3,000 square feet of lot area. For multifamily, there is no minimum.
That's not.
Is that what you're
No.
asking?
How many development rights will they have to buy? How many 3-acre development rights will this project, which could be up to 150 units mixed between market rate and non-market rate, require? Will it be a maximum of one development right per unit, or is there going to be some factoring because of the economic issues or because of the workforce housing? And if so, what will that factoring be?
Yeah, there is some factoring as far as workforce housing, and I'd have to get back with you on that.
I don't know how to make a decision if you don't know that, because that goes to the general plan. Is this, are we talking? What, can you give us some idea of the factoring?
I don't.
My understanding is that it's 15%, right? So
15%?
yeah, affordable rent restricted units do not need a development right to a maximum of 15% of the overall project, right? So my expectation is out of that 150, as I understand the zoning, we would need 128.
That sound?
I'd have to look in the ordinance to make sure. I just don't have that information right at the fingertips, but I can get that for you.
One more question. When you came before, you had discussed that you weren't going to have short-term rentals. But my understanding is with the zoning, without any requirements, it could permit short-term rentals unless we made an exception or a specific note of that. Is that true, Rick?
I'm sorry, I was looking at the ordinance trying to
Oh,
find
okay.
that. You say that again, sir?
Okay, when the developer came in before, if I recollect correctly, you had mentioned that there was no intention to do short-term rentals. But if we approve it as going forward, the zoning would permit short-term rentals unless we put an exclusion to say short-term rentals are not permitted. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Thank you.
They wouldn't be included everywhere. There are certain properties. and
There are certain areas
certain
where
Size, type of units. you
That
could,
is correct.
But others you couldn't.
Yeah.
Per the code.
Right.
Unless it was stipulated.
that
I
is
thought I
correct.
understood that small lot residential didn't necessarily allow for short-term rentals, but that the vehicular oriented commercial might.
Yeah, the vehicular oriented does and the multifamily does. The small lot residential has restrictions.
So, and one of the things I said at the public meeting, we, Cowboy Partners owns and operates about 3,500 homes in Utah. To my knowledge, I don't think we've done a single night of short-term rental in the history of that portfolio, right? It's just not something. It's certain in workforce housing, you wouldn't do it at all. It makes no sense. You know, you have the same rent restriction, you have to do all of the compliance and so forth. You don't do short-term rentals in those anyway. And for us, figuring out how to operate that and do that next door to residents who moved in, not expecting for that to be part of their community is a difficult thing for us to overcome. So we've never really gotten our minds wrapped around doing it. So, our properties run on long-term leases, and that's how we generally operate. So, I actually didn't know whether or not short-term rentals were allowed. I figured that they were not actually, and that was what was pointed out to me at the public meeting last week. So it's something that really hasn't gone into how we're thinking about this project.
Can you define long-term? Just
I mean, we will sometimes sign a 6-month lease in lease up to try and,
Sure,
to,
stabilize.
break up when those move outs are, but we want year leases,
Okay.
right? We don't, move outs are expensive.
Okay. In subsidized housing, does HUD put a restriction on lease terms?
I mean, just in the rent restriction, right? Certainly there's a number of things that you are, have to meet in terms of accessibility and fair housing and so forth. But they don't necessarily limit lease length. But again, especially in workforce housing, it's so in demand. And there's no premium to doing a shorter lease. You can't charge more, if you're renting your house, you can charge more for a night in Airbnb than you will get for a 30-day lease or a year lease or whatever. But that number is the exact same for us. And when we have years and years worth of waiting lists of people who want to live there and live there for a long time, we'd much rather go with someone who's going to be there a long time.
Does HUD restrict in subsidized housing to subletting?
We restrict
STR?
subletting,
You restrict.
like in all of our projects. So even in our market rate projects, we don't allow people to sublet. We're very heavy-handed operators, and we have a reputation for being so, and that's part of how we meet the expectation of all the residents as a whole. So we have a pretty thick rules package that comes with each lease as you sign that you have to agree to. And so when we find residents subletting, they are evicted.
Final question. In the work meeting, I thought it was, you stated this was for 170 units. And then 145 would be the number of TDRs that you would need to make it work.
I think the maximum we would do is 170, right? So within the ranges 80 to 100 on the workforce side and 50 to 70 on the kind of market rate single family side. My expectation is that's going to land more around 150, but 170 as we just kind of think about the site without doing a whole lot of site design, that would be probably the maximum that we could put on the
So
site.
up to 170
Yeah.
current thought.
Mhm.
And these are 2-bedroom, 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom.
There'll be a range, right? So I think that within the workforce housing community, there'll be one, some studios, but mostly 1 to 3 bedroom homes there. The single family for rent will be mostly 2 and 3 bedrooms, but there'll be probably some 4s or 3 bedroom plus dens.
So intended for families with children.
Correct.
Thank you.
And 15% is the amount, so.
So is that calculated? How is that calculated if, assuming a project takes many years? Calculated based on the prospective build out or as you go?
It would be based upon what they propose as that phase of the
Per
subdivision.
phase.
Mhm. And that's how we would have to track it.
So there's a 15%, so if they're gonna build 10 houses, for 10 units initially in a phase, they would need essentially the building rights off 30 acres, so you subtract 15% of that.
Yes, and then what we do too is we look at how it, if they use a lot in that one phase, the overall, it would have to end up being 15%, so to restrict them down the road as well. So we have to look at it on a case by case, but then we look at it as a whole as well in the end,
So
because it would be tied to the development agreement.
hypothetical. If I'm gonna build something, I want to get the bonus. I mean, it's a bonus. It's a 15% less TDRs I have to move in. So I'm gonna do subsidized housing. And then when I get tired of subsidized housing, I'll just do regular housing.
Or if you wanted to put restrictions in the development agreement, you could do something like that as well, if you didn't want to see that happen. If that's a concern.
Well, I'm just thinking that, yeah, that could be done. Who can tell what's gonna happen
Right.
in the future? Yeah.
And at some point, I mean, no matter how you cut it, there's a maximum. I mean, again, within 150 units at 15%, no matter how we break it up, right? We're going to need at least 128 TDRs. More likely is that those phases are separate, right? So the financing of affordable housing and workforce housing likes to be pretty self-contained, right? So if I had to say today, that phase is probably going to be individual, right? So that 15% factor is likely to be applied to that phase. The single family for rents will likely be self-contained itself and will probably get no bonus, right? Because that individual phase, the project as a whole might have, all the affordability in the world and enough to get 22 TDRs that are not necessary. But the reality is that when we start to break up those phases, it's more likely that we'll need more than 128, but at 128 would be the absolute minimum out of 100, with 150.
I'm not
residential
implying
units.
that Calgary Partners would do my hypothetical. But with assuming the Olympics come, and people are paying 3 times what you can get out of your subsidized housing model, one might decide, well, I'm tired of subsidized housing.
Well,
And that could happen, right? Unless it's in the development agreement that they've got to be maintained as what they are.
whenever we build affordable housing and the subsidies that you get to do affordable housing require land use restriction agreements and deed restrictions that are at least 50 years in Utah. So that's, you can want to do that all you want, but
Okay.
unless you've built it with no subsidy whatsoever. And in that case, it's just a market rate unit. You've decided to rent at affordable rents, but it's every single subsidy. So we'll have a stack of deed restrictions that wouldn't allow that to happen.
Okay, so we got to wait for the 2084 Olympics.
Right, then, yeah, I'm cashing in at that point.
So I saw on your website that you list 20 some different projects, and I think 3 of them showed as sold or recently sold.
Yes, and those are the three that we've sold in the last 2.5 decades.
So those sold with deed restrictions on them?
So one of those was an affordable housing project that was from the 90s, I believe. So at that time, I think there were 30-year deed restrictions. So, you know, I wasn't involved in that transaction. I don't know if those deed restrictions were still in force, but I think the seller was likely looking to refinance that with tax credits and use that to refurbish the project a little bit, and probably was part of their acquisition plan. That would make the most sense for that particular property, right? 30 to 35-year-old property is not the most ideal property to be taking to market.
Good, okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Rick, did you pick up anything you want to respond to before we move to? Okay. Let's entertain a motion to open the public hearing.
Move to open the public hearing.
Second,
I'll second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All righty, so we are gonna move into the public session for a public comment. Please state your name and address for the record prior to making your comments. And then if you do have anything, please give that. We will need to give that to Marta and to us. If you're presenting anything, if you're speaking on behalf of committee or board, that's 5 minutes. And then if individuals, please keep your comments to 3 minutes. We will, if you're online, use the little hand emoji if you'd like to speak. As you can see, Kay has done for us as well. Kay, why don't we just start with online since you're right here, and then we'll move to here. I see. Oh, good job. Go ahead. Unmute, Kay. You'll need to unmute. Okay. Yeah, bottom left-hand corner typically.
Okay, thank
There
you.
we go.
Not that bad. Just took me a while to get there.
Your name for the record, sorry. I know I said it, but
For the record, I will state my name. Kay Hoagland, 5447 East Fraser's Ridge up in Eden. And I am speaking on my own behalf, although I'm the president of the Wolf Creek Master Association that represents the HOAs within Wolf Creek. First of all, I want to say thanks to Cowboy Partners in their breadth of considering issues for our valley. You know, it's kind of refreshing to hear that green space, roads, workforce, housing, etc. Here's my personal concern, and I think I may express it for the Master Homeowners Association. My concern is what we are seeing now is the evolution of a patchwork of plans and proposals for development. And what I would ask the Planning Commission in the Planning Department to do is look at this a little bit more holistically. How does this relate to Eden Crossings? And this proposal in particular, but also if you go up the road on Powder Mountain Road, shortly up there, you find open space that is now perhaps going to be a sewer company and storage units. This is the old Wolf Creek barn property, and the owners are not intending to preserve that as open space. And so when you look at our larger plan for Wolf Creek and as it fits into the Ogden Valley plan, I'm just urging that we coordinate and talk so it's not a patchwork of good plans or not so good plans, but put together. And then when you see the whole, it's not coordinated. So I guess my question is for the planning commission itself and for our planners, how can you coordinate this as a whole? I know you have to respect property rights, but I know also we have to look at the Ogden Valley plan. And I think I and most of our folks up here are concerned about, you know, the coordination of open space, parks, which it's nice to hear about, but also the commercial areas as well. So I'm throwing out that question for not only the person proposing on behalf of Cowboy Partners, but also for the Planning Commission. How do you look at the big picture?
Thanks, Kay.
Sure.
Okay, seeing no hands online, feel free to raise your hand back online if we do. Okay, we'll come back to that after all the comment. So go ahead and start with those in the audience. State your name and an address and we'll go from there.
Shanna Francis, 4609 East Creekview Drive in Eden. Since the county staff is asking you to make a decision on this proposal, and as per the staff report, they say it's based on, and I quote, the currently adopted street regulating plan for this area. And I want to point out for the record and for the minutes and for your concerted consideration that according to state law and the state law's due process requirements, you were to hold a public hearing and make recommendation to the county commissioner before this street regulating plan that you're making a decision on tonight, before it was approved. And you, the planning commission, never had a public hearing on the street regulating plan. Ogden Valley, all the residents, we had no opportunity to come in and offer our input and let you consider concerns that we may have had when this street regulating plan was adopted. The commissioners adopted without by foregoing that step of due process that is required by state law. So I'm asking you to please ask the county to petition them wholeheartedly to come back and allow Ogden Valley residents to have a public hearing on this street regulation plan before any more decisions are made. Ask you to table what's on the record right now and do the right thing as required by state law. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. Gary Fulmer, I live in Eden. I have 2 points. One is, I think we might be getting the cart before the horse a little bit here. Based on the maps I've seen from Cowboy Partners, there are several exits and entrances out of their properties onto Powder Mountain Road. I counted at least 4. Also one that goes over into John Lewis's property, apparently. The impact on the 4-way stop sign with that additional traffic, I think would be incredible. We can see what's happened in the last 3 weeks when there was construction around there and there were flagmen there and how that was all congested. So I would suggest a little bit more flesh out on how you're going to handle this traffic, what modifications might be made at that 4-way stop to handle the increased traffic. And it kind of goes to what Kay said and sort of what Shanna's saying too, is we need to think ahead a little bit here. Now, as a personal note, I have a daughter who's moving here in 2 weeks. She is now an employee of Powder Mountain full time. Powder Mountain is expanding their staff. She cannot find anywhere to rent in the valley for under $4,000 a month. Now she's gonna live in my basement. And I'd really appreciate it if somehow we could get her out of my basement. So this project has the merit to do that. But how and it's going to be put in place, I don't know. I know there's other problems, a lot more problems than my daughter in my basement. But I do think we need this kind of project in the valley, but I don't know where exactly. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Jan Fulmer. I'm the other half of Gary Fulmer. And I want to thank Cowboy Partners because they did have a session in the library last week and invited the community to come so they could explain what they're doing. The idea of having workforce housing or affordable housing in our valley, it's needed. We need to retain our community. And to do that, we need places for people to live who can work in the businesses, all right? And overall, there are some very good things about this development. However, moving forward to rezone it at this point without having a little bit more detail on the exact number of units, the type of units, and also, will there be a water and sewer commitment in our lifetime? I think you're aware of the issues that we're having with culinary water commitments and also hooking up to have state-of-the-art sewage processing, which is going to be needed for something this congested. Also, we're talking about the potential of 170 dwelling units in a very congested area right now. They also have 2 park areas on either side of Powder Mountain Road. I would not want a family with children crossing Powder Mountain Road. It's dangerous. They've got the pool and the community center and something else on one side. They've got a park on this side. That is just not going to fly, especially if you look at the traffic going up and down that road right now. And I don't see it stopping anytime soon. The other issue is getting the TDRs, the development units. That's key to this. And you know what? It really has not been resolved yet in the valley. And the transfer of development rights is key to the Ogden Valley General Plan. I applaud these folks for what they have put together, but also to put out what Kay Hoogland noticed, we're getting patchworks here. We've seen what's been proposed for up at Wolf Creek, which is a commercial strip. You know, there's supposed to be a restaurant. Also, there's supposed to be a swimming pool up there. Hasn't happened. If this is rezoned now and nothing is resolved with water and sewer and some of the basic needs, Cowboy Partners could say, okay, I give up. But now it's already zoned to form-based, which is a wide open door for someone else to come in. So please consider that. The other thing I would like to mention, if I could, is I've never seen our 3 county commissioners jump up and down so happy as when they met with the Western Weber County Planning Commission on what's planned for affordable housing in JDC Ranch over on the other side, you know, of the mountains in an unincorporated area, where they're interspersing affordable housing with regular priced housing. They were elated. As a matter of fact, they wanted a deed restriction on it. No rentals. People would buy it and it would be owner occupied. I know that is not Cowboy Partners' business model. They also said, oh, and by the way, if we can do it, we want to make sure that the homes are only sold to people living or working in Weber County, because they didn't want to start providing affordable housing for Davis County. And you can look at this, it's in the video recording of their work session. They also said they would like to see a nice HOA installed over the whole development. to have it be self-governing and to make sure everything is maintained. So I'd just like to give you that. And once again, Rick, I've never seen all three commissioners jumping up and down, and I think you were at that meeting when they went over this proposal. But in any event, that was their take on plans for affordable housing. So please, it's something to consider. And the big issue is the number of units in an already congested area and crossing that road to get from one side to the other. Okay, thank you.
Commissioners, Ray Bertoldi, 4828 East, 3650 North in Eden. I might get in the weeds a little bit here, but I'm just going to comment on, I can only comment on what I've seen. There's my concerns are maybe ghosts of Christmas past that have been built below my neighborhood. And if you really want to get a good example of what some things could look like, hopefully they don't, is to go take a look at the villages at Wolf Creek. That is a development that has a combination of multi-story condos. And then just below that, there's a number of single family dwellings on small lots. Recently, there's just been more and more of the smaller single family lots going right to the max of height. And there are 5-foot setbacks between them. Some of them went and got variances to be less. And according to the building code, the IRC, they're too close and they're not fire rated. There were some things that were missed in the condo project in terms of setbacks and things like that. I had talked to the plant. This was the planning department way before the staff that's there right now I was just told flat out missed. You can go look at how close roof lines are to one another and things like this. But my point is there's a number of drawbacks that have happened because of that density. You can go on there on a weekend and there are cars parked all over the road, just like you were talking about the larger trucks and things like that, right on these little small roads. The snow gets pushed out onto Wolf Lodge Drive, which was part of their agreement. They would provide their own snow, placement. There are, there's just a number of things that are wrong with that, with the density. And if you kind of compare the footprint of that area to particularly the west side of this, I'm wondering how that happens, in particular where the property goes around where the two houses are. There's about 104 feet there. And if the road actually is on the other side of those two houses, that gives you about 40 feet of depth. I don't know how you do single family houses in that depth. Examples in here of some of the single family homes show a 1-foot setback. I'm not sure how that works according to code requirements, things like that. Another thing, those are just things that I'm thinking we're going to have. And this entry, these two particular parcels are the gateway up into the Wolf Creek area. It's the threshold of how you get there. So how that's handled from a design standpoint, I think needs to be handled, context is part of the form-based zoning. So what is the context of design? And particularly when you start talking about small footprints going perhaps 40 feet high, go up to the villages, take a look at the greenhouse that's there right now. And it's, you've just got these stalks, and my home is up above that, and still it's taking out a number of neighbors' view corridors. Again, I'm just looking at what's been presented. Certainly, I think there needs to be a lot more detail presented that we can, take a look at and judge that, the design of that. I can appreciate having low income, and affordable housing. Some of you know that I am an architect. I'm licensed in 8 states. We do tax credit housing, mostly rehab all over the country. So I can really appreciate the people that are there and the developers that do those projects, the ones that have really good intent to provide a good product and a place for people to live. It's it's looking at it in terms of place and context. Certainly it has to work in a pro forma and things like that. I can appreciate those things, but I really would hate to see another Wolf Creek Village show up right at the gateway into Eden. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, Craig Orem. We're at 2687 North Wolf Creek Drive, which will be the south house on the west side. So we'll be surrounded by this. First, just to reiterate what's already been said, I'm not sure how you rezone when you don't have sewer or water to even begin your project. That being said, we've been there 28 years. I assume something would get built here at some point, but more likely single family houses, not high density. Not looking forward to high density housing crammed around me with more congestion, noise, not to mention the dust that's going to be happening during this whole construction process. Hopefully, if it does go forward, something happens different on our side. Like Chris mentioned, maybe the park is closer to our house for a buffer zone. That would be nice. Other than that, just wanted to voice my concern about it. I know how you would feel if 150 units are going to go right around your house suddenly. Thanks.
Thank you.
My name's Tina Allred. I am the newly elected president of Eden Waterworks in Eden. I have a letter that I would like to give her. And I'll go ahead and read the letter. I'm a resident of Eden, and then I've got some personal remarks I'd like to make after that. That's okay.
Sure.
Okay, so it says it's come to the attention of Eden Waterworks Company Board of Directors. The proposed Cowboy Partners project has represented that the Ogden Valley Planning Commission, Weber County Planning Department, and Weber County Commissioners that Eden Waterworks Company may be providing culinary water for the aforementioned project. Eden Waterworks would like to inform the parties there is currently no agreement for Eden Waterworks Company to provide culinary water for the proposed project. To date, Eden Waterworks Company Board of Directors has not been formally approached by the developer, and no discussions have taken place regarding the Cowboy Partners project. Additionally, Eden Waterworks currently has a moratorium in place, which would likely prohibit company shares from being offered to Cowboy Partners. This moratorium was put in place in part due to the rapid development being approved in our area, which may outstrip our resources, and based on the content of the Ogden Valley Water Supply and Infrastructure Study that was commissioned by Weber County and Weber Basin Water, as presented in the county to the county in a work session on July 18th, 2022. That study indicated in part that, quote, there is insufficient available water in Ogden Valley to meet the build-out projections, partly due to the historic water rights such as for Ogden City's wells, unquote. The study presented on July 18th also included the statement, if the county, quote, if the county does not wish to actively lead efforts to secure more water, then significantly limit the approval of additional development in Ogden Valley, unquote. That particular sentence was removed from the presentation that was given to the public, which causes me great concern. You may not know, but the Eden Crossing project was not granted water by Eden Waterworks. Mostly because that water, the reuse water, was going to go into a sewer project, which is now prohibited by HB 349, says that any wastewater that would normally go to the Great Salt Lake cannot be collected and reused. So the the board has made the decision that we don't want any of the water that Eden Waterworks has used in that sewer, and that is the decision of the board, supported by a large majority of the shareholders. You may not know, but right now, there is a large well being drilled just north of this property, the property that's on the east side, up in the Kobe area. And that well will likely impact our spring. And if so, it will more than likely be protested by Eden Waterworks. They're simply, okay, I'm going to stop there as far as my official capacity and give some opinion. There simply doesn't seem to be enough water up there now without impacting someone else's water rights. I tried to bring this information to the county commissioners and was summarily dismissed as not being a concern. Shortly after that, the developer was contacted, and the developer sent a threatening letter to my water board. And I had to retain legal counsel to contain that. A letter was also sent to the Weaver County Commissioner because of statements that the developer said that the county made. My lawyer sent a letter to the county to ask if those statements were made, and the county declined to reply. And I still haven't received a response to this date. So it's concerning to me that when a citizen goes to the county to try to point out these critical infrastructure issues, that their opinion is not apparently taken seriously. And I'm hoping you will take it a little bit more seriously, because we are definitely at a point where every well that is being drilled at this point is impacting someone else's well or water source. The other thing I wanted to bring up, I own a shuttle company in the valley. I've operated since 2013, and so I go to a lot of these places to pick folks up. And the village that the other gentleman was mentioning, I pick up there quite often. Those streets are narrow, and there simply isn't enough room to contain all the snow that needs to be removed from these narrow streets. You can barely turn around in there. And so when they're, I'm no architect, but if they're talking about you've got a 60-foot wide street, but they want to make the street narrow, but just not own that land and put some flower boxes there or something, it's a terrible design for the valley, because you get these massive snowfalls and you've got to have somewhere to put that snow. So I think it would be wise to take that into consideration while you're considering everything else. As far as the low-income housing, I understand the need to provide housing for workers. I would just also add that I think it's undisputed that low-income housing brings crime. And if you don't think that's true, I was part of when the Ogden Landlord Program was established by Ogden City. And they had done studies that showed that police responses respond more to multifamily structures than they do to single family structures. And therefore, when they put in the Good Landlord Program, that you had to take training to try to screen your tenants better. And if you chose not to participate in that, they started charging a licensure fee, and that fee was to offset the additional law enforcement costs to respond to these projects. So that's something that you might want to take into account in your decision-making process. I think that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name's Miranda Menzies. I'm a resident of Eden, I guess it's Wolf Creek, 3807 North Elk Ridge Trail. I'm the president of Wolf Creek Water and Sewer Improvement District. I'd like two things taken into consideration from the district. One is that we have passed a resolution that states in part that we will not accept any applications for service or consideration of any application for service for sewer unless that entity has water or a commitment to provide water from a recognized entity, recognized public water provider, or a water right that has been approved. In other words, it must have the approved water right before we will look at it. Because we could see that we were going to have so many people coming to us wanting to buy service, and it isn't fair if they don't have water. The water has to come first. The second is I would like to make a clear statement. As the chair of the board, I haven't discussed it with my board, but I believe that we will stand with Eden Waterworks. The Eden Waterworks and Wolf Creek Irrigation Company, which is the secondary water provider, and Wolf Creek Water and Sewer Improvement District have worked before on water rights issues and will do so again. If protests are necessary, we will stand shoulder to shoulder as necessary, because typically if one source is affected, and I believe that the Burnett Spring is the one that Tina is referring to, it is quite possible that our sources may also be affected, and we will all work together to deal with that issue through the state engineer's process. Personally, I'd like to make a completely random comment that a park is all very well, but what we really need is a decent playground. I just spent 6 weeks in Ohio taking my grandchildren to playgrounds that were so much better than anything I have seen anywhere here in Utah. They have ADA compliant equipment that allows for kids who are using wheelchairs to have a great time with their friends. You can get some really, really great equipment, especially if you can provide some shade so it doesn't get too hot for little hands. Random comment, which I'm sure Mr. Zarek will consider. I'm excited to hear that Mr. Zarek might consider some sustainable in terms of energy efficiency and water conservation housing. Met him at the Intermountain Sustainability Summit that Weber State holds. Weber State is a leader nationally, and I'm delighted that Mr. Zarek and his partners are participating in that forum. Thank you so much for consideration.
Thank you.
I'm Janice Campbell. I reside at 2359 East, 6825 North. I am the block captain for our neighborhood, and we have probably 60 houses that I'm responsible for, and I'm active in the CERT program. I confirm that the water is dire. Liberty Water Company's board meeting informed us that they have 81 letters to fulfill, and they're done. That's going to be it. And as far as affecting us for the water, they will be extending only to a point that is short of our neighborhood in the north end, leaving us as a community without proper water pressure for fire protection. And this is a very serious thing out there. We've already had one fire in that neighborhood. We're on a slope. And the suggestion by the people that we use fire retardant to protect us is a fallacy, given the location at the very north end in the mountains. That's not going to work. And so to get to the basis, your plans are very soon going to have to consider hardening of the homes, because we aren't going to have fire to protect ourselves. I have already made arrangements with a company in California, a manufacturer of fireproof venting that has a honeycomb design and closes upon heat exposure in order to help my neighbors save their homes, because we certainly aren't going to have water available to do so. I bear in mind, you have to look at what this planning and Weber County Development has done with us. Started out in 2014, a nice general plan. The estimate was that there were 33,000 acre feet per year available surplus. That was quickly then trimmed to 30,000 acre feet. And then when the USG, the United States Geological Study, came out in 2019, the available acre feet were shown to be 3,000. So the original development of the Ogden Valley started out with this nice amount of water, and then it was turned around in a few short years to have 1/10 of the water available. Yet, when they revised the planning in this community, the Ogden Valley, it was only cut back to about 60% of what the build out was potential to be. So these problems are of the planning's own creation and really super ambitious planning in view of the limited water resource. And I beg you, you were not at the April meetings of the effects this water shortage is creating among the citizens, and to hear the state board engineer litigate for the families who are losing their water because of the continued drilling and who have backwash and all kinds of things happening to their developments and their homes that are damaging them and making this place impossible to live, all for the fact that this agency development, redevelopment agency development of the ski resorts, and these guys are coming in and they want to have 300, 600 acre feet of water just to blow snow. Where do your loyalties lie? To the dollar or to our communities? And I thank you for listening.
Thank you. Anybody else? Anybody online? If you'll go ahead and just raise your hand. Okay. I think there's no comments here in the audience or further comments or anything online. I'll entertain a motion to close the public hearing. Do we have to? No, that'd be up to you.
A motion, we close the public hearing.
I second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Just for my own sake, can we take a 5-minute bathroom recess since there's only 5 of us? Is that okay, Rick? All right. I didn't mean to make everybody leave. All right, well, we'll go ahead and we just recap and we just close the public hearing. So there's a number of things we could, Rick, I don't know if you want to start first, if you heard anything, or we could let the applicant any rebuttal.
I think the applicant would like to rebuttal, but I'd like to maybe make a few comments, if you don't mind.
Nope. No.
I was visiting with Commissioner Barber just during the break and just wanted you guys to be aware. When we looked at Eden Crossing, and when we're at the rezone level, the only thing that's required at the rezone level for consideration is a certificate of notice from, you know, the water companies, just letting them know that this is how the developer would like to do that. But he's got a lot of issues to address with water and sewer, and he knows that.
Yeah.
And that those specificities come at the subdivision level. But you know, there's a lot of things with water and sewer that are addressed at the subdivision level, and that's how Eden Crossing got approved, and they still have to work on those things before, you know, those things can come to you. So I just want you to be aware of that. And then there was at the beginning, I think it was Kay Hoagland, she talked about, you know, the patchwork and things like that. And when we did the street regulating plan, the intent with the street regulating plan is that we have that connectivity and the different connections that happen with uses as well. So we have that transition that occurs, and the applicant has followed the street regulating plan so that we don't get that patchwork, and so that it does connect into Eden Crossing, and his development connects into future developments. And so that's why we created the street regulating plan, is to get rid of the patchwork element. So I just wanted to bring those couple things up. And if you guys have questions for me before we chat with the
Yeah,
developer.
Rick, I have a question for you. There was a comment made during the public comment section that the process, the state process for the street regulating plan wasn't followed, if you remember that.
Yeah, and
Is that true?
We've looked into that with our legal department, and Cortland may want to weigh in on this, but we feel that we're in full compliance with that.
Thank you.
There is an active lawsuit on that issue, and it has. Okay. There is an active lawsuit on that issue, and you know, it has yet to be resolved by a court, but the county proceeded and people challenged that.
Thank you.
Rick, that was something, Director Grover, that is something I did want to, that water was, and sewer was a big notice. And I think if it's just, it is dealt with at subdivision level, is it fair for the public to say, if you'd like that change, that's just a request that goes? How do they, how does the public, if they're saying it needs to be considered sooner?
We'd have to amend the ordinance to have those requirements done and required at the rezone level, whereas right now it's not. And the developers vested under the current ordinance.
Correct. I just want to point out for those that make the comment that they want to see it sooner. They encourage us, we have to follow the ordinances as a planning commission. So we'd then encourage those if they want to see a change to go ahead and ask for that. Is that fair?
That is very fair.
So Rick, could you clarify that? Because in here, the county recommends this for approval, and one of the stipulations is in here written by the county that it needs to be hooked to septic, to a sewer system, not.
Yeah, and that's just.
But isn't that what you said just now?
That
you can't.
At
this point.
What you're making it a requirement that when they get to the subdivision level, they have to address that. You don't necessarily have to put that in there because they're going to have to address that. But we just wanted to put that in for more comfort.
So could you put the mirror image language in there with respect to water to say that when at some point they have to be hooked to a real water system, they just can't drop their own well?
Well, they could if they got approval the right way to drop their own well.
But
They'd have to go through the state and get those
they could
approvals.
get approval for a septic too, probably.
Right now, as far as how everything's working in that area, that's not feasible. When we've spoken with the health department, to do a septic for those amount of lots in that area. But, you know, if you wanted to put that in there, you know, you could. And that's why we did put that in there, just to make more clarity, because stuff that happens in the development agreement can go above and beyond
Right.
The zoning.
So you could put in there similar language for water that's in there for waste.
You could.
Okay, any other questions for staff before we? Okay. I don't know if you want to do any rebuttals. Again, just say your name just so they know you're back up here. And we'll ask any questions following any rebuttal.
Sure. So Chris Zarek from Cowboy Partners. We are the applicant. I do appreciate the comment to Ms. Hoagland. She had a great comment, and, you know, as we were talking about, you know, the ability to, you know, optimize a particular project. Yeah, that's easier without a street regulating plan, but the reason to have a street regulating plan is to create some sort of framework for the larger area, to develop in a way that doesn't feel like a patchwork. So, you know, I think we recognize the value of that, which is why we kind of put, you know, maintained that and didn't, you know, we're not looking to necessarily amend that form-based code. You know, there was some discussion, you know, I think it was a valuable comment to talk about an example of a project, a collection of buildings that kind of came together that is seen as problematic. I actually think that's probably speaks in favor of our application here, right? In the way that we do things, the fact that we come as an owner, operator, someone with experience building these communities in mountain settings, someone who understands that this thing has to be run with the level of quality or people move out. Right? We have an economic incentive to make sure that we are designing in snow storage areas, right? I mean, we design these sites quite a bit. We understand how to work with snow. We understand how to work with stormwater. We understand how to operate communities in a way that runs smoothly and top level, right? So, because if we don't, people move out, and that's the most expensive thing that can happen within a residential community. So that's actually what we're known for, right? We're as a developer, as an operator, we actually find ourselves to be quite popular with, especially with jurisdictions, because we're very particular in the way that we own and operate things, and that's why we've been around here for decades. So, you know, I really appreciate that comment, and I think developing and operating with that more global perspective is what should give a little bit of assurance, and it hopefully reflects upon our application positively. You know, I think the water and sewer, we understand, and I have to point out, well, we also understand that there's a lot of history here with, you know, beyond our development and with other developments and so forth. And so as we're talking about developers and legal letters and so forth, that's not necessarily us, right? And we've had none of those types of communications. We understand that there are a number of things that are unique challenges to developing in Ogden Valley that are going to take a lot of time and attention and money, quite honestly. And these things have to happen in a particular order, right? You know, the site design of a project and the purchase of TDRs and the commitment of water and sewer, and those things take a lot of time and a lot of money. And what we're asking here is that we put the zoning in place so we understand that we can have a project so that we can start spending the time and money that is necessary to put these things in place. And we understand nothing gets built unless we have water to serve these homes unless people can turn on a faucet or flush a toilet, right? We can't have a building permit unless we meet basic code, right? So that is a hurdle that we're going to have to overcome in that subdivision process. And we have to start somewhere. And for us, starting here is the rezone. Now, you know, we've never represented that we have anything from Eden Waterworks. We have said in the letter that was in your packet that we think it makes sense for us to be served by Eden Waterworks. We're in their service area. We think we could do things in a way that would be mutually beneficial, right? In the way that we are, you know, having efficient use of infrastructure and ratepayers who can help with the maintenance and upkeep of that particular system. But we understand there's a moratorium, and it's a private water company. They have no obligation to serve us. And so that particular item is going to take, you know, it will take time and it will take money, but we're not going to be able to build until we figure that out. And we understand that. We have appreciated working and engaging with the Wolf Creek Water and Sewer Improvement District, and they've also been very clear, right? They're at capacity with their treatment plant, and in order to get approvals there, we'll need to have the water. They don't have water to give, and they'll have to increase their capacity. And that's a process that takes some time. And unfortunately, so is development, right? Our process is going to take some time from here to get there. So we hope to work in parallel. We know that we already have a transmission line to wherever that might be going is coming through our property right now. It's in the ground. We have an easement for it. So we have the ability, certainly, you know, we don't operate any of our properties with septic systems, right? We want water and sewer. So we are going to work to have all of that in place. And so for us, it's a process, right? We need to put this in place, and then we need to start work on the very real logistical challenges here that are part of this. So we certainly appreciate all of the comments. And, you know, I think that our intent here is, again, to be good neighbors. We're long-term owners. So we don't want to build or develop in a way that's creating problems for anyone. And so that's our intent, and that's our commitment to make.
Thank you. Any questions for the applicant? Thank you. I have just a comment for Director Grover. So I think Jan pointed out a fair point, and I just don't know the answer. I've heard this before. Cowboy Partners, let's say it goes in favor of our recommendation. It goes to County Commission. They approve the rezone. They end up just not doing it, but it's form-based. What happens to that?
So in this situation, there's a development agreement that's associated with it. So we would have to have, another developer would have to come in and they'd have to rework that development agreement, because that agreement is between the developer and the county.
Okay.
So they'd have to go back through and
But the
do some amendments.
form-based zone would remain form-based, or would that be rescinded?
The form-based zone would be based upon the development agreement, a connection to that. So they're kind of tied together when you're doing development agreements. And typically also when we do have a caveat in the development agreement, there's usually an expiration date associated with that. If it was just straight form-based with no development agreement, then it's form-based zoning. And the only way that could be, and that would carry on to development as they sold that. But when you have a development agreement, then that's between the two parties.
So the model motion in here is not a development agreement, say, that would come later,
No,
total written agreement such as Eden Crossing ended up.
it would. Those are things that would go into the development agreement that you're looking at.
Right.
But that development agreement would be carried out and executed through the county commission.
Thank you.
Here, if I could make a suggestion. I came in here with the thing in my head that this is an approvable project, but it's complicated for a lot of reasons. I learned a bunch of stuff for sure. Some things I didn't quite understand coming in here, and nothing that I heard really changes the fact in my head anyway. This is potentially approvable, but it's not, but it's complicated. So my suggestion is, and I wrote down, if you were going to ask me to vote on this tonight, I would want 6, maybe 7 things inserted into the map that would make this more functional project long-term for the valley from my perspective. I don't think it's fair to do that right now, speed do it. I'm going to suggest we maybe table this. That works for the county. And then come up with something that is more, that's a little broader, that takes into account what people said, what I at least learned tonight, and see if that.
Thanks, Commissioner. Yeah, noted.
So I spent some considerable time looking at the staff report and Charlie's analysis of the form-based zone and how this all works. And I've got some real concerns that primarily this doesn't fit. It's not consistent, congruent with the general plan. The general plan talks about small villages, small. And this is not small. I think back to I was considerably involved in the development of the general plan back in 2015 and 16, and how it was presented to the community, and the idea that we're going to preserve the culture of the valley, the people culture, the physical culture, and we're hopefully going to come up with some areas that have more open space, and the rights from that open space will move to small villages. There's a bunch of small in this general plan, and this is not small. Charlie writes here in the staff report that by virtue of the regulations adopted in the form-based zone, it will implement development design standards that are needed to create attractive villages and neighborhoods. And that's the reason I asked the applicant tonight, are you restricted from having maybe something that would be even better because of this form-based zone and its restrictions? Also, this statement that by virtue of the regulations adopted in the form-based zone implies that you can't have attractive villages or neighbors without form-based design standards. And I take exception to that. You don't need the form-based zone to have great design standards. There's talk in here of having, I mean, this is detail. It's just adequate parking being 500 feet away from these residences. Well, 500 feet away doesn't work for residences. Part of my career has been managing student housing complex. Those people want to park 10 feet from their front door. They won't walk 500 feet for parking. They won't carry groceries 500 feet. So the idea that you can put this kind of residential density in this small an area and have it look like the pictures that we see, it just practically, it doesn't work. It works in small villages. Last week, I was wandering around the small villages in Germany and France. And they're small villages. and they work, and they're surrounded by beautiful open space. One problem I have with this is we've got form-based to the east. We've got the form-based to the west, and this area would connect form-based, so we have a connected huge form-based area. And I think that's inconsistent with the general plan that talks about small villages. If you got a breakup by having open space between small, higher density areas, is a whole lot different than jamming it all into one huge place. I note that there's a comment here, it's intended that form-based will replace the CV2 zone. Well, CV2 is commercial. And we're talking about residential here. So why are we replacing something that separates commercial out and putting residential in it, combining the two? That doesn't make sense to me. I don't think it's consistent with the general plan. The general plan painted a picture of rural area. Rural was the overarching description of the general plan. And rural was enhanced by moving some density to small village nodes. And this isn't consistent with that picture that we had in 2016 of what the general plan was all about. I took the opportunity to talk to the folks at Valley Elementary and at Snowcrest. Valley Elementary is, their census is now about 570 students. They've been as high as 650. I asked them, how many more students can you take from your 570 before you start having to install portable classrooms? They said 80 to 100, and then we're into portables. I talked to the principal at Snowcrest. They're right now just under 300. He said we could maybe take 100, 150, maybe squeeze in 200 before we go to portables or have to start adding on. Well, it's one reason I asked the applicant, who's going to live here? Is this families? 2, 3, 4 bedrooms? Yes, it'll be families. Well, families have kids. And we're talking 170 units. I assume that there would be an average of at least one student per unit. So there's 170 children, and if they hit Valley Elementary all at once, we're into portable classrooms. That's not small rural area. That, I don't think that is consistent with the general plan. It's stated here, Weber County Code has 6 general decision criteria for determining whether a rezone is merited. A, whether the proposed amendment is consistent with goals, objectives, policies of the general plan. Well, that's why I don't think it does. It doesn't meet this criteria. This is way different than the general plan that says small and rural. B, whether the proposed amendment is compatible with the overall character of existing development in the vicinity of the subject property. I listened to the gentleman who is in one of these residences that will be surrounded potentially by this high density. And that doesn't meet this criteria. The overall character over there is AB3. It's rural residential. It's not high density. C, the extent to which the proposed amendment may adversely affect adjacent property. Just spoke to that. I have the impression that I heard, well, if I don't remember exactly, it was to the effect that, well, time will change and these homes will be abandoned and this will all become high density, something like that. It's just not consistent with Weber County Code's 6 general decision criteria to surround AV3 home sites on large parcels with high density housing. D is the adequacy of facilities and services intended to serve the subject property, and that's schools, and I just spoke to that. In this staff report, there's a statement. As a legislative decision, a rezone should advance or be consistent with, my words, the goals of the general plan, comma. Here's where I've got a problem, or at the very least, not be detrimental to them without some good cause. I don't know where this qualifier came from, but I think the legislative decision, a rezone should advance the goals of the general plan, which are small villages and rural and agriculture. And that's what people had in mind in 2016 when this was adopted, this general plan. The general plan speaks to preserving the character of the valley. Well, this form-based zone of this size utterly changes the character. It overwhelms the character of the valley in this area. And I think for that reason, it's inconsistent with the general plan, and we ought to recommend denial. The staff report says if we don't do this form-based kind of development, we will become large lot suburban neighborhoods of Ogden, where the lots are 150 feet apart. I did the math. A 3-acre lot is 361 feet by 361 feet. It's not 150 feet apart. The staff report says preventing this eventuality under the AV3 zone is a primary cornerstone of the plan. The plan was written to specifically drive a shift in the valley's future away from AV3 zones. Outcome. Well, wait a minute. AV3 zone is rural residential agriculture. And drive implies taking away individual property rights to accomplish a driver's vision. Driving people into some kind of a form-based plan where somebody's figured out the architecture and you can do anything within the walls of the architecture. I don't understand how that can be good for the valley. Can I build a prison if the exterior looks like a Disneyland castle? You know, the idea, zoning is, let's keep uses compatible in the same area. It's not put a facade out there and do whatever you want inside. That's inconsistent with what I understand the general plan to require. So the proposed findings are that the proposed the proposal substantially advances the vision, goals, and objectives of the Ogden Valley General Plan. And I don't believe it does at all. It almost seems like we create an artificial construct of TDRs. And then a lot of efforts are made to try to support TDRs and make them work. And we have to keep up with more and more detail. How do we make this artificial construct work instead of just leaving people to come up with their own plans for their own property under traditional zoning? That's long enough speech, but that is some real concerns that I have, that I think recommend to me at least denial of this application for a rezone.
Thanks, Commissioner.
I struggle with the small village. Many units. Interested in.
Okay, I think I'm thinking more general than that. I'm thinking if I look down from the sky and I saw little villages like I saw last week in Europe is different than what connecting these two form-based zones will create. If they're small, the impact is small. Once they get big, the impact is big. Now there's an argument that, well, we've got to have everything clumped together so we can get sewer and water and services and all those things. Okay, you can make that argument. And maybe that's why we have big cities like Ogden. But that wasn't the vision that was presented to us in 2016 about this general plan. Therefore, I think this application, the approval would be contrary to the intent of the general plan.
Thanks, Commissioner. Any other thoughts from commissioners? I have a few, but you and I think often alike. I'd say here I probably differ because in this one, as I read it, and I spend a lot of time reading land use code, it's saying put, and I think we need to be careful not to just jam, 10 pounds in a 1 pound sack kind of thing. Yeah. But it does read, how do we bring density out and add more density in the middle? But I hear your words, and you were on the commission or on the committee that did that. So I hear that. I just don't see, in my mind, the idea of getting more information can make sense. And it sounds like to me, Commissioner Burton, is that form-based, or is it the application that's, I'm trying to read between the lines.
Well, I see that this form base is creating more problems than it's solving. But form base is what we have to deal with today because it's what's in place. But I don't think it's appropriate to join these two big form-based already zones together. That doesn't make small, it makes big. And that's why I say, let's not join them together. Let's go to the vision of the general plan, which is small villages. Now, it said, well, we can't jam all this density that we want to transfer into Nordic Valley, Wolf Creek, Eden, whatever. Well, my memory is back in 2016, the thought was we'll have multiple small village areas, small areas where the density is higher, not just in these, 7 or 8 that have been identified. There will be multiple ones in the future that will come about. based on market conditions and what landowners want to do with their property.
Yeah, and in my mind, that the workforce housing, we'll just call it whatever you want to call it, attainable housing. I don't know, I went through my master's degree and called like 7 different things through that process, right? So it's just changed, but they feel complementary to, and there is stuff next to the grocery store with that commercial, and then with what the applicant proposed on Eden Crossing, the amount of workforce housing, they feel complementary to me, but that's just my opinion. That's my feeling. So I hear that.
I recall was a year or two ago when Nordic Valley came to us. And they wanted, well, first it started with Snow Basin. They wanted not to use density to have the workforce housing for people that worked at Snow Basin. And then it came up with Nordic Valley, which is a small area. And they said, we'd like to have some workforce housing here. And the commission at that time was, yeah, that's a good idea. It keeps them from driving the canyon or the pass. It's good to have those people right here. If we get the canyon closed, we have people here that can operate Nordic Valley. So yeah, we need a place for people to be able to live. I don't think we need it to be inform-based. I think it could be in other zones. And yeah,
I understand.
But right now, today, yeah, I see a need for form-based, for workforce housing and I see a need for places that people can live and afford it. But I don't see a need for joining these two big areas together.
And I hear that. I think the struggle I have as a planning commissioner, it's disputed tonight, but as the county feels, we have an approved street regulating plan in front of us that an applicant is following. It's not asking to change. So Commissioner Barber's standpoint of, yeah, there's probably more questions here that may need to be answered, but it feels like the applicant is somewhat, they're doing what the county is, but us as a commission, we have feelings, or some from the commission.
I don't know that what the applicant is proposing couldn't be a good idea in a different place. Because we do need some affordable housing, some workforce housing. We need that. But I don't think it goes here. And this is a legislative matter. We have broad discretion. We don't have to approve a rezone request just because the street regulating plan says if you go to form base, this is what it's going to be.
Point taken. Thank you. Any other discussion? Or otherwise we can entertain motion.
Like to make
Just
a
like to
motion.
reiterate that, you live, you learn. I learned stuff with the way that we handle Eden Crossing. I knew the county commission was with that, and I think we could have done a better job. We voted to deny it. We could have done that. Would have crafted the wording a little bit better. So again, I want to say that this, looking into the future, if I were to bet money, I know how I would bet county commission. And I would like to be able to do a really good job for the community of crafting our wording or the specific stipulations, taking into some of the things that I just heard, which I don't disagree with. So that when we do put something together, up or down, it's done well. And I don't feel that I could sit here right now and vote for any at all. Let's add some things, our own language, but that's a little different than add to it based on what I've learned. I want to look at it with a wide perspective, and I've lived in other ski towns. I agree. I don't think that's a great place for workforce housing. I think it's a lousy place, but it is what it is at this point. Craft some language.
I'll entertain a motion.
I'd like to make a motion. I move that we forward a recommendation for denial to the county commission for file ZMA 2024-05. An application to amend Weber County zoning map, rezoning approximately 17 acres of land, approximately 2773 north, Highway 158 from the AV3 and CV zones to the FB zone, as provided in Exhibit C. I do so with the following findings. 1, the proposal is not adequately supported by the general plan. 2, the proposal runs contrary to the health, safety, welfare of the general public. 3, that we can have attractive villages and neighborhoods without form-based design standards. 4, that the form-based proposal here is contrary to the intent, the concept of the general plan of 2016 for the Ogden Valley. Let's track the numbers, whatever's next.
Stuart, state your findings.
The next finding is that if the form-based zone being, I'm going to say this, it's not appropriate for residential uses to be concentrated in what will take over from the CV2 zone. If we have a commercial zone and we're going to replace it with this form-based zone, and residential uses will be then permitted in an area that it would be, well, it's now AV3, but could be designated CV2. That's not consistent with the general plan. Next finding, the general plan concept is for small villages, because this proposal would join 2 large areas already in the form-based zone. That would create not a small village, but a very large village, which would be inconsistent with the general plan. Next finding, that the Weber County Code 6 general decision criteria for determining whether a rezone is merited are not met by this application. Specifically, A, B, C, and D thereof relating to rural, not being incompatible with the overall character of existing development in the vicinity, and C is the extent to which the proposed amendment may adversely affect adjacent property, and D, the facilities there, specifically schools, are not adequate to serve the intended development under the form-based zone. That's my motion.
Thanks. I tried to write it all down, but Cortland, do you feel like there's enough finding in there to we're good?
I do. It's on the recording. As long as the recording captured that, it should be fine.
Okay.
For the record.
We got a first. Do we have a second? You know, second. What do I do here?
If there's no second, the motion dies, and somebody else would need to make a motion.
Any second, just to be clear? Okay, no second, motion dies as it stands. I will entertain. Do you want to have a discussion on that, or do we just want to move to another motion?
I'll put forward a motion. I think we've heard a lot here. And I think I would motion that we defer this to take under consideration to a lot of the things we've had so that we can go ahead and when it goes in front of the committee, we can make sure that we have taken into account the public comments and that the points we discuss, we can put in so that those points go forward to the county commission. Because right now, I don't think we're collectively in agreement on what all those points should be going forward to the county commission.
So a suggestion of a motion, I just say there's a formal way to do it, and I don't
Okay,
know if you
I'm
want-
sorry, I might.
No, you're
might
okay.
thought the
No,
formal
you're
way.
you're okay. I actually think there might be, if we're in a table motion, do we want to hear Commissioner Barber's? He has a similar motion. Sounds like it could have some detail to it.
Sure.
You want to hear that, and then
Well, I'm not gonna state, I don't want to state my.
you're fine. I'm just wondering.
But I would second that motion, which is exactly what I said, to table the matter. So we could craft whatever we decide going forward with more thought.
So if I can, I'm just gonna restate your motion. You tell me if this is okay. The motion is for ZMA 2024-05 is that we table the issue to further discuss. I'm more just trying to state the application and what we're doing. It's a more formal process. Cortland, does that need any further to be able to move forward?
If the motion is simply a motion to table for the reasons that Commissioner Postenbaum mentioned, that should be sufficient.
Okay.
It would be nice to have it tabled to a time certain date, so it's just not hanging out there.
Okay, that's so.
But we have the work session coming soon.
You could table it to that date if you so choose.
So friendly amendment is to table it until
Until the
next work. Okay, accepted. The night, which is June 4th, correct? Okay, and we have a second.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Question,
Oh, sorry, I'm sorry.
if it's tabled to a work session, we can't take action on a motion in a work session, is that correct?
That is correct. We would have to have it for another meeting. Yep.
At
And
the work session, you can fully discuss and craft.
And then we would possibly move to some type of recommendation at the end of June. Is that correct?
I'm just saying that tabling ought to go not to the work session, but to a meeting after the next work session or something.
you could do that as well, which if you want to table to a work session to have more discussion, or if you want to table to the next regular meeting, and then we could consider it at that time. But the problem is we don't have guidance from you. We have a little bit from Commissioner Burton, but from the others, we don't have guidance on what you would want unless there wasn't a work session, or unless you were able to
So
show
my
us.
outlook would be at the work session, you know, we discuss the details that would be crafted, and we discuss the whole array of possibilities, and then take that to the next voting session.
I agree with Commissioner Burton that the best course would be to table it until the next regular meeting for decision purposes.
With the expectation to bring it to the work session to work on it.
Correct.
Okay. Yeah. That good with you're good with that? Okay, so we're talking about the 25th of June is to tell the table with the expectation to be worked on June 4th. Good with the first, good with the second still? Any other discussion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right. Motion to table passes unanimous. Okay, we are going to move on to items for public comment, not on the public comment for items not on the agenda. Again, if you are here, please stand up and state your name. Come on in, Jan.
I just want to say thank you very much for your time. I know you spend a lot of time on this planning commission. and your time is very much appreciated.
Thank you, Jan. Okay, not seeing anything else. We'll move to remarks from planning commissioners. Anything?
Yeah, I've just got one comment. I'm really having a problem with this form-based zoning. I think it has brought to the valley a lot of divisiveness because of the idea that you adopt form-based zone, you rezone something, anything can happen there. Anything. And that puts people really on edge and gets them concerned and creates this divisiveness. I think that's maybe part of the reason that we're talking about an incorporation that may bring us significantly higher property taxes. But it's a reaction, I think, goes back to this form-based zone idea that is so you can't you change to a form-based zone, anything can happen, and that makes people nervous. They like to be involved. They like to know what's going on. If it's I want to change from an AV3 to a CV2. Okay, the public can read the code and understand, okay, if we change, these things can happen in the CV2. We change to a form-based, anything can happen. And nobody can say anything about it. So my comment as a planning commissioner is, I would really like the county to look at this form-based zone and the problems it's potentially causing and maybe rethink the form-based zone.
Thank you.
You say form-based zone, you're taking into account like the color coding, regulating, and you're taking into account architectural. Besides those two things.
Well, I recall on the Nordic, this is, I think, first time we really addressed form-based. And we could picture, here's Nordic, a little ski resort, and they want to have a hotel there and some things that support the ski resort and perhaps some shops. And they'll have some hotel, and downstairs you can go to the gift shop and you can buy a ski hat or whatever you want. That's a really small area. Okay, that could make sense. You can do ski resort stuff in this small area. But now it looks like form-based zone is available anywhere in the valley. Anybody can make an application for a form-based.
I don't think that's true.
They can make an
That's
application.
not true.
They can make an application, just doesn't mean you'll get it. You can ask for anything.
Yeah, they could make an application, but it wouldn't comply with the general plan.
Right.
And the form base there, it's a hybrid because there are certain uses that are not allowed in form base. So you can't have everything, but it does open the door to more things based upon design. So.
And when we first started talking about form-based, a primary reason for going to form-based was we don't like development agreements. We want to get away from development agreements. And now we're in form-based and we're full bore on the development agreements. So we didn't meet one of the major factors we wanted to go to form-based.
I would agree with that. Because the last one we did had a development agreement associated with it. And this one, there's additional conditions.
Okay, thank you. I would say that for those that tabled and do have ideas for the applicant to be successful, it probably is worth writing some of this down and sending it to staff. So at least I think it'll be more productive on the 4th.
I will send my notes.
Okay. Yeah, I think for the applicant's sake, I think it would be very productive if we.
Who should we send our notes to?
I would just send them to staff.
Okay.
Yeah, send them to Charlie on the staff report. So.
But I just feel like that when we get to the 4th, if we have our ideas of what we'd like to work through with the applicant, that's my remarks is that so we can be better prepared for that with the applicant. Correct. Prior, it's got to be prior to, and the applicant's got to be aware. So that's just a request. You don't have to, but I think it'll make a more productive meeting.
Is the applicant invited to the work session?
Definitely.
Thank you.
Okay. Any planning director report, Rick? Nope. Okay. Legal counsel?
Nothing, thank you.
Okay. I did see one comment. I'm willing to come backwards to that just so you can make sure you get on the public record. State your name for us.
Yep. My name's Tina Allred, from Eden. I just want to make an observation in support of what Mr. Burton just said, that it seems like you can put the form-based zone anywhere. If you guys will recall, the first form-based thing that was approved in the area was nowhere near one of these villages. It's up a rural street. Transfer development rights came from Sunnyville Farm and went onto a piece of land that is nowhere near any central point. So if that doesn't fit the general plan, that was done in error.
Thank you. Okay. With that, we'll move to adjourn. Thank you.
So, yeah, so I'll get into that in just a minute. But they cleaned it up a lot and it looks so much better. And
Who uses that campground?
it's a private campground for the Eagles.
But just that you have to be a member of the related.
Use the fraternal order.
Yeah. Yep.
All right, well,
You ready?
let's kick it off. Go ahead.
Okay, all right, so the first one on there, is is it the Eagles? I gotta get my glasses on.
Yeah.
First one's the Eagles, second one's the Olympic. Thanks. So the Eagles, they're, it was like back in 1964. And the last 3 years, we've been trying to get them to submit a conditional use permit to get them to come fully in compliance on some sheds and some fences up in that area that weren't part of the original conditional use permit. And so they finally submitted that information, and that's what you have before you on that one. The thing I just handed out was just some of the exhibits that weren't in there. The staff report and what the campground site is up there. It's actually 145 in the staff report. It shows 142 sites, but when you look at the diagram, it's 145, and that's what the request is. And you may notice in the narrative, it says 61.15 acres, but in Tammy's report, it says 72, and it's actually 72, the overall site, but the front part, the turnaround area, they didn't calculate in that, but it's still part of their site. So anyway, just minor things, but just wanted you to be aware of that. Everything on this looks in order. They're meeting a conditional use standard as we look at it. And like I said, they brought everything into compliance, and it's going in a much better direction than it was about 3 years ago. So
Same ownership?
yeah, yeah. Neighbors up there, we've had so many less complaints the last few years, and that it was. So, yeah, so I'll get into that in just a minute. But they cleaned it up a lot and it looks so much better.
And who uses that campground?
It's a private campground for the Eagles.
But just that you have to be a member of the related.
Use the fraternal order.
Yeah. Yep.
All right, well,
You ready?